Last week I finished reading Chicago by Glen Head. This is an autobiocomic that Glen Head did, published in 2015 by Fantagraphics. And it's a really interesting book, and I don't really do reviews of books that are current or trending. It's just what I happen to read. And I really enjoyed this, so I just want to spend a few minutes of talking about this and Glen Head's most recent book, Chartwell Manor. How I found out about Chicago was from reading Chartwell Manor, which came out in May of this year, and it's also published by Fantagraphics. And this is an autobiocomic. It's a really ambitious, powerful autobio, and this is a book that you should read just because it's so good. And Glenn has done a lot of interviews in print, and he's also done a lot of web interviews. He's very interesting to listen to. He did a very interesting interview with Noah Van Sciver on Noah's YouTube channel, talking about comics and the craft. And I think anybody who's a creator would really enjoy listening to him. Thought it was pretty fascinating. But this book, just to give you a simple overview, it's his stories of being a teenager, going to a boarding school that's run by a pedophile, and how those experiences impacted his life and the life of some of his classmates. And in him particular, he had a lot of issues with alcohol abuse. He's been sober for years, and also sexual addiction. And what I liked about this book was that he tells the story as is. If someone looks monstrous, it's because their actions are monstrous. If someone's sympathetic, it's because the way they are is sympathetic. It seems very much like this is the way it really was. But when I read this, I found out that he did this autobiocomic in 2015 called Chicago. So where this book starts off is that he's 19 years old and he's going to go to art school. And Glenn comes from an affluent family in the suburbs of New Jersey. His father made a lot of money on Wall Street. I love this color work. The book is black and white, but there's a couple of scenes that are in color here in the end papers and here. I just love this color. I would love to see more of his work colored. It just looks great. But he goes to art school in Columbus, and he's there and he's not going to classes. He's drinking. He's just wasting a lot of time. And then he's like a rebel without a cause almost in this art school. And then later on, he's like, you know what? I'm just going to go to Chicago. You know, Columbus is Nowheresville. I'm going to go to Chicago and live life and see what's really going on. So he just takes his portfolio, the clothes he has, including a leather jacket, his hat, and he goes to Chicago. No suitcase, no money, no anything. And quickly he finds that he's cold, he's hungry, and he's taken in by a guy who's actually a good Samaritan. And what's interesting is that Glenn is a wealthy white young man, and he's living in the south side of Chicago. He's trying to become an artist. This story could go wrong in a dozen ways, and the story is really amazing. It's like one of those things where it's like it's only real life could be this crazy. And a couple of scenes here that really made me laugh was one where he's outside and people are gathering around because Muhammad Ali is outside in the street. It is like, you know, and so Muhammad Ali then, you know, he's a tall guy, he's a strong guy. He did that whole thing where he act crazy, but sometimes you didn't really know if it was all an act or if he could. And everybody's like revering him. I want your autograph. And Glen Head is like wisecracking to him. And, you know, everybody's like, oh man, you did it now. And then he's wisecracking to him, talking, and Muhammad Ali at the end is like, hey, you know what? You're not so dumb, white boy. Look at, you know, you're not as dumb as you look, white boy. And then he just like slaps him on the shoulder and he just goes off. It's a wild story. And the other wild story that, of all these wild stories that are here, is, this came with the signed book plate, was that when he was in Chicago, he started doing some work for Playboy. He went to a dinner party where Robert Crumb is the guest. Now, Robert Crumb is his idol, or one of his idols. He decided to meet him. But Robert Crumb comes sort of like one of those guys that have been successful, and it's like, the pain of success is too much. And, even he's like Robert Crumb has this line where he says, "And not enough big girls want to let me jump on them," and he's like what's going on here? So I like the fact that he's honest enough to say, I met Robert Crumb, and he just like said, this is the way it went. The one also subplot that's in here is that early on, before he goes to art school, it introduces the character Sarah, who's a friend of his, and later on they do reconnect. And the story, I'm not going to give it away, but the story has a very, almost like a circle kind of ending, where a lot of things happen, but the way it ends is, it's kind of similar to the way it begins. It's a really well done book. It's just great. And if you were going to do, this is just my opinion, if you're going to do the life of Glen Head and it was all this little chunk is Chicago. But what's interesting is that in Chartwell Manor, this is all part of the same timeline, but Chartwell Manor never references Chicago. So if you didn't know this book existed, you would never need to know. But I read this to read this. Now that I've read this, I want to reread this, because the character of Sarah is introduced a little bit in this book, but it doesn't reference anything that happened subsequent. So it's kind of interesting, because you learn about his life and then you want to read more, and then you read this much, but there's still room for more. It's a very interesting life. And I'm up for reading more of this. I just find it really interesting. His style is very reminiscent and very influenced by the underground guys. But one thing that I like about him is that a lot of the underground guys, and I've recently read Crumb and S. Clay Wilson, is that seems to me they did a lot of art just to show you, hey, we can do wild art because we can. I really am not into that art. I mean, the art's very well done. I'm just not into the subject matter, but they influence a lot of people whose art I do like, including Glen's. And it's just really interesting autobio comic. I read the first 20% in one sitting, and then I read the other remaining 80% in another sitting. I just couldn't put it down. So if you've read this, well, if you haven't read it, you should. But if you've read it, you've got to read this. I picked this up for a pretty good price on Amazon. I got lucky because the book came in good shape. And one other little interesting thing that I noted was that this book was printed, the paper's a little sheen to it. So the blacks come out blacker, the whites come out a little whiter, just from the printing process. This book, the paper is really good paper, but it's more flat. You see, I got all this underground kind of inspired, like, shows on like madness. But it feels more like a traditional comic. So it's just, these are like weird minutia that people that have been reading too many comics start noticing. But as I said, this is a great book. You should read this. You like this, you're definitely going to like this. And I am up for a lot more of his autobio. It's just a fascinating life and very interesting guy. So thanks.